Hello, fellow viewers. You're once again welcome to another edition of Smart Money Talks. And as you all know, my name is Munja Shirley, and I'm on this program again with Erwin Weeds. Hi, Erwin. You're welcome to this edition of Smart Money Talks today. Where are you?
Fine. Very well, thank you.
Abidjan or?
No, not yet.
Okay. So, how is Namibia today?
It's good. It's, yeah, very pleasant. Very nice.
Okay. So, Erin, today we're going to be talking about buying versus leasing a house, right? So, I think this is actually a very interesting topic too because it looks quite easy, and it always feels like to many it's kind of like the obvious decision when people have like a lot of money. It kind of seems like buying a house is like an obvious decision. But I think from the topic today, it means one really needs to think about the decision of whether to buy or lease a house, right? So, what are some of the pros and cons when it comes to buying a house?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe let's talk about maybe renting first, because I think that's where we all start off. We just
Okay.
exit school, or we just start our careers somewhere. I mean, you start off renting. I guess that's the normal how one goes about it, and it's really because it's the cheaper option, in at least in the short term. So typically, if you can't afford a bond installment, yes, you probably can afford to rent, and it allows for flexibility. I mean, if you are mobile and you are not necessarily in the same city, in the same place for a number of years, you can move around and rent somewhere different. The costs are much lower because in addition to the bond installment that you pay at the bank, you also have to put money aside for repairs and maintenance on a house. You have to put the money aside for rates and taxes, levies, insurance, those type of things. And then there are, at least when you buy the house, it's not only the price of the house, but it's also transfer duties, things like that. And you need the deposit. Well, if your bank insists on a deposit, I think most of them do, at least a small one, you would need to have that money. So that is the kind of pros really on renting. And then there are the issue is obviously you are not building up any equity. You are basically paying somebody else for his property that he can pay his bank, so that he at the end of the day owns a property and you don't own one. And then over time, as inflation increases, your rents will also increase. And that's where it becomes interesting if you then think about buying. Because if you buy and you pay your bank installment, now that installment, it can increase if the interest rates increase. But generally, over time with inflation, it will not increase, whereas your rental price increases. And then, but the property value will increase with inflation. So after 20 years or so, or maybe after 15 years, what you are paying relative to what you're earning at that point in time, assuming that your salary also increases with inflation, or maybe a little bit more because you're making career progress. So then at that point in time, your kind of what you're paying to the bank is really quite small chunk of your salary. It's quite affordable, but you have already accumulated substantial amount of wealth in your property, and then so then it becomes really interesting. And then after 20 years, well, maybe the property is fully paid off, and whereas if you rent, you don't have that. Now, that's the simple explanation. There is another one, and that it goes along with trade-offs. So if you say you are, instead of paying the upfront cost for the property buying, the deposit that you make and the transfer fees and whatever, and then whatever excess is that you would on the bond compared to the rent, you would invest that into some kind of a S&P 500 traded fund or something like that, or share portfolio. Then there could be some kind of a trade-off, because then it becomes a matter of opportunity cost, where you could say, maybe there's actually some benefit in allocating funds to a share portfolio opportunity rather than investing in the property. But I mean, that's quite hypothetical, and it really works out over the long run if you have that discipline to invest those extra funds compared to the bond. So I don't think necessarily it's something that may actually happen in real life. And where we are in Africa, I mean, I think we have a couple of compelling reasons also to consider. So we have growing population, we have high urbanization rates, and so that will actually fuel the property market. And I mean, we see it that the places at towns or cities that were at the outskirts like 10 years ago, now they are almost in the middle of the city, and there's a new outskirt where again properties are cheap, and the ones that have maybe the others have grown in value because of, just because of demand. And so that's something to take into account, and that puts us in a very different position, for example, or Japan or so, where there are aging populations, they don't grow, they don't have that many children, and property grows at a much, much slower rate, or maybe it even decreases in value over time. Property doesn't necessarily increase. And I think one needs to keep that in mind, so that there are people in this world that live a different reality than we live.
So, Erin, talk to me, right? For instance, in maybe those that are living like in the diaspora, right? Not necessarily in the diaspora. When I actually kind of like talk to most of them, I discover that actually getting a property is like what is like the norm, right? It's kind of like, okay, as soon as you get a good job and maybe your credit score is good, the first option is really to get a house. Are there some circumstances besides the one maybe you've mentioned that you feel that maybe renting a house is going to be better than maybe getting a house on hire purchase, for instance? And what are those?
I think there are a lot of compelling reasons for getting a house. But again, if you are like a global nomad, if you're moving around, it may make sense to rent. If you're not living in the house, you could consider a house as an investment. So you make the down payment, which is large enough so that the rent can carry, that the property can carry itself through the rent, or that the rent can pay the installment. But even that's a challenging one, because in order for that, again, it depends on the market, but most of the time, the rent, in order for that to make it work, you would need to have quite a substantial down payment, which is not really in everybody's reality to have that type of money. And then, of course, you run another risk. If your tenant leaves you and you don't immediately find another one, then you need to take the full installment out of your cash flow plus your rent. And then that's another question. But yeah, I mean, I guess there are in a house, especially also if you have a long-term view and if you get older. Because if you just rent and you're not saving anything beyond, then once you get to a certain age where you want to retire or so, you still need to keep on paying while you may not have a income source. Whereas if you are reaching retirement age and at least you have got a house to live in, sorted, at least from that perspective. You don't need to worry about renting while you don't have another income.
Okay. Okay, so Erin, then talk to me, right? Let's assume that actually the person actually of a view that you have this person, maybe Mary, for instance, that is of the view that okay, buying a house is a good option, or even getting a house on hire purchase is a good option. Now, what do you think are some of the hidden costs that maybe Mary might not necessarily see from the get-go, or that Mary should actually pay some particular attention to when she's trying to get this house?
There's obviously, and it's a good question in the sense that if you buy a house, you look at the price and you say, okay, this is the price. But now you have to add to the price, you have to add transfer duties, legal fees, and things like that. And they could be substantial. So in Namibia, we used to work on the basis that that's usually like 8% of a house. So if you buy a house for a certain amount, add another 8%. And that's not a luxury house. So if there are luxury houses or so, then obviously the transfer duties could increase. So they work also on a scale that for lower value properties, they are smaller. For larger value properties, they get more. But that was the rule of thumb, add another 8% to have the full price. The second is that in addition to your installment that you pay to the bank, you need to cater for maintenance. Now, maintenance will not happen in year 1 or year 2, but essentially it will happen. And if you want to maintain the value of the house, you will need to, at one or other stage, start spending money on it in terms of repairs. Then you have to think about your insurance, at least for fire and things like that. Now, that's not an exorbitant amount, but one needs to take account of that. You need to take account of your rates and taxes that you pay to your municipality, and basically take all of that into account in your monthly cash flow budget. And I think that, yeah.
Yes, Erin, I'm getting you.
Yeah, no, so and I think that kind of calculation that just goes beyond the normal bond calculation, that's what a lot of people don't do. They just think, okay, I can afford so much. How much? Okay, and then they say, okay, that's X amount. How much? What is the type of the price of the property that I can afford with that? And if you do that, you may be missing out on these kind of hidden costs or things that you think about.
Okay. Thank you so much, Erin. Erin, now when you were talking before, right, you made mention of the fact that generally, especially when you're getting a house on hire purchase, it's very important for you to look at maybe rising interest rates, right? Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you should actually take into consideration maybe interest rates and also the aspects of inflation when kind of like deciding whether to buy or rent a house?
So in some way, it's a little bit like this, that if inflation is high, interest rates are also high. Now, if you buy at a time when interest rates are high, maybe they can go on in future. So that can help you with your installment, that can make it more affordable. At the same time, if you think about, I mean, at least for the near term, it's useful to have some idea of which direction the interest rates will go, because you don't want to be caught up with interest rates, and unless you have a fixed interest rate arrangement, but I mean, normally mortgages are based on variable rates. And if you, for example, look at what happened in the markets, especially in the US after 2020, so basically rates were close to zero, and then they increased to 5%. Now, if all of a sudden you have to pay 5% more in term on your loan, that's quite significant. And I don't think anybody really thought about that before, but that's kind of, so you need a little bit of flexibility, financial flexibility, to accommodate something like that. So that's on the interest rate side. On the inflation side, inflation actually helps you, because if you're a homeowner or a prospective homeowner, because inflation will make that over time your property will gain in value. It will make that your salary is supposed to increase. Your employer is supposed to pay you more if the inflation is high, at least annually with inflation adjustment, while your bond repayment stays the same. So in that sense, inflation is good compared to being, if you rent, your rent is also likely to increase with inflation, yet at the end of the day, you don't own anything. Now that can change in some way.
So, Erin,
in a low inflation environment. If you have very low inflation or no inflation, I mean, then it's kind of inconsequential.
Okay. So, Erin, when you're talking about interest, right? Okay, now, if, for instance, you have Mary, let's still use the example of Mary, who is about to buy a house, what are some of the things that maybe Mary can check to see, right, if maybe interest rates are going to be rising in the next couple of years? Or is it something that is just a gamble that you just leave it to chance?
No, I mean, so
Hi, Erin. Can you just retake that again?
Yeah. So I would say normally central banks, they determine the interest rates depending on inflationary expectations. And one can actually do a quick Google search these days to say, okay, what are inflation expectations? Is inflation expected to go up or to go down or sideways? So, and then usually there's some kind of anticipation, at least for the short term, as to where interest rates may be going. For the longer term, one doesn't necessarily, it's more difficult to anticipate. But again, I think really over the short term, maybe over the next year or two, that's where you need that additional buffer. I think thereafter, all other factors equal, I mean, if you think maybe your salary will also increase a little bit, then every year when that happens, basically your financial burden will become lower.
I mean, please, just for someone that is listening to us and is wondering what is this inflation stuff that Erin keeps talking about, right? So please, can you just explain? I know we're going like backward. Please, can you just explain to us, like in a layman way, what is inflation?
And we all see it if we go to the supermarket. Last year we paid less than we pay now, so that is basically inflation, and it's calculated on a price basket. So that price basket includes consumer goods, food, housing, telecommunication, a lot of different elements, fuel. And typically economists use that to gauge the price level increase in an economy. And basically the central banks use that to determine the interest rate. So if inflation increases, typically interest rates also increase. And then if inflation comes to lower levels, then the interest rates decrease. So the two work hand in hand. But it's useful if you want to understand where interest rates could be moving. it's useful to look at the inflation and
Okay.
or the inflationary expectations, put it that way, or what the expectation about inflation is.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erin. Hello, guys. Please remember we're here for you. The reason why we go live is because we give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as possible. So please feel free if you have any questions for Erin, or if you even have some questions for me, even though I'm going to direct it to Erin, right? You can leave it in the comments section. Is that okay? So please kindly feel free. Remember, this session is just for us, right? So leave your comments, leave your questions and your contributions. Okay, please tell us what you actually feel, right? We're actually discussing something that is that a lot of us maybe have already witnessed it. So tell us what your experience has been, okay, when it comes to deciding whether to rent or to lease a house or to buy a house. Is that okay? So tell us what your experience has been, and if you have any comments, contributions and questions for Erin. To jump back to the topic, right, you have, let me actually describe a couple of circumstances, a couple of situations, right? Let me situate us and you help us tell, kind of like just advise based on your experience and in your own opinion, tell me what you would do in this case, right? So let's assume that you have this student, right, who just kind of like left school and for some reason was lucky enough to find a job, right, that is actually well paid. And within that first year, he or she is kind of like wondering, okay, should I actually rent or buy a house at this point in time? So, in your opinion, what should this student do at this point in time?
It's really on how much this student, or I mean, it's not a student anymore. It's somebody
Yes,
who
yes.
working, who is apparently earning well, as to what his, I mean, first of all, how much he's earning. So, and then whether he could potentially have enough money for a deposit, because I think, I mean, normally financial institutions ask for a deposit. Sometimes it's 10%. There were times at least here in Namibia, when banks offered 108% home loans. So that's, they will actually give you 100% plus pay for the legal fees and the stamped duties and things like that as well. So that 8% that I spoke about. So basically, you don't need any down payment. And if you like a graduate professional, like maybe you studied medicine or you're a chartered accountant or something like that, it was kind of also catering for that market, for really people with good earnings prospects and so on. So, I mean, if you're in that category, yeah, I mean, I guess, and if you think you're going to stick a while around, if you say, okay, you know, I'm having this job, but I want to go to the UK next year, maybe not such a good idea. Maybe it's useful to rent for the time being, and then do your move. But if you think you're going to stay there in that position for some while, yeah, it's good. Get the house, and then yeah, I mean, I wouldn't see any issue with that.
Next scenario. Let's assume you have this contractor who suddenly gets a contract, right? He has actually been looking for a contract for a very long time, maybe for over 3 years. He's been trying to get a contract, and suddenly, boom, this contract actually comes. Now, he's not certain if maybe after getting this contract, he will get another one. So, what will your advice be? Should he rent or buy a house?
No, keep your flexibility. I mean, if you're not certain about your cash flows, then yeah, it's don't get that additional burden on top, because you don't want the bank to chase you and to
Okay.
take your house away and all of that. I mean, it's quite emotional, and you can spare yourself a lot of trouble, because at the end of the day you're gambling on something where you don't have certainty on.
Okay. Then let's look at this other scenario. Okay. So you have this employee who has been working for a very long time, lives has actually been changing countries, right? Maybe goes, maybe it was in, let's assume was in Namibia, right? For 3 years, and maybe suddenly moves to Ghana or Senegal. Let's use Senegal. So maybe suddenly moves to Senegal and has like a 3 years contract, but more or less he has actually gathered some money in his account, and now he has a regular job, and for the last maybe 6 years he has always had a good job. So should he rent or buy a house?
Because I mean, buy a house where it's a guy that has been moving around. So if he comes from Namibia, if that's his home country, and he says, okay, I want to own a house in Namibia that I maybe rent out and I will use it if I come there to retire, maybe that's an option. The other alternative would be to say, okay, you know, he has got the necessary money for the deposit, he can pay for it, he can buy a house in Senegal. The question is, how long is he going to stay in Senegal? That his 3-year contract, will it be extended? Or will, I mean, what is the longer term objective? Is the objective that even if you don't hold a contract anymore, that you will have a holiday home in Dakar or so? I don't know. So that is actually quite an interesting question to which I don't have an outright answer, because that is really very much dependent on personal preferences. But to the extent, and that is now what I could say to my, basically from my own kind of perspective, to the extent that there is potential for the contracts to be renewed and that he's going to stay for a longer period in Senegal, for example, may actually be useful to also buy. Because of, you know, I mean, property values increase, and then if all of a sudden out of the 3 years it becomes 10 years or so, well, if you bought 10 years ago, then for sure you would have built up some money. And even if you sell the property thereafter, I mean, that could be quite interesting.
Okay. Thank you so much, Erin, for that. Erin, just to ask, right? I was just wondering, right? Is the kind of in your opinion?
I didn't quite get the question. If you can repeat that.
Take, for instance, someone who is kind of like, okay, I need to live a good life, I need to always have a car, I need to dress well, and things like that. You know, someone who actually wants to live a pretty expensive life. Can it at all? Maybe some other person who wants to live a pretty chill life. Maybe I'm very reserved. I don't care. I can have like one shirt and I just change and do my things, you know, versus someone who is very kind of like, okay, I need to have like all the designer dresses and all of that. So the someone's lifestyle, or should someone's lifestyle be able to affect, right, their decision on whether to rent or buy a house?
Maybe not so much the decision, but the outcome of the decision. So if you, because at the end of the day, if you have, I mean, if you have less financial flexibility, so your spending habits need to be customized to that, to the fact that you have to pay a mortgage, which maybe is a bit more expensive than what you would be paying in rent. And so in some way it forces you to be financially more disciplined, I would say.
Mm.
And so if you it's maybe beyond the question of lifestyle, it's a question of financial discipline. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And how much are you prepared
Yes.
to save? Yeah, basically.
Wow. Okay, Erin, so what advice will you have for people that are kind of like wondering? Because when I see what I see the trend, for instance, in Africa, right? I know this is not really like related. This is more related to buying a house, right? I feel like the trend in Africa is like most investors feel like the safest bet really is to be able to get a house and maybe lease out, right? So what do you think about this? Because almost everybody, right, most people that are working, for instance, like the safest bet, like one of the most kind of like taken decision, it's kind of like buying property and putting them on rent. What are your thoughts around
Buy a property to rent it out. I mean, I guess that is, or even here in Namibia, I mean, it's a lot of people do that. The question is, what other opportunities do you have? And compared to the other opportunities, would that still be a good investment? And property time, yes, they gain in value, but at the end of the day, if your tenant can help you pay your installment, yes, but you also have renovations, you have rates and taxes and so on. So you have a lot of costs. So at the end of the day, I mean, it will be an investment, but will it, for example, be have better returns than if you took some money to the US and you would have invested it on the into the Standard & Poor's S&P 500 or something like that? That is maybe the question. Or if you have a lucrative business deal or lucrative business idea that you would want to invest your money on. And then property returns, I mean, it's a fairly safe asset, but with safety also comes a certain safe assets are not necessarily the highest yielding assets. So I think that is something that one needs to understand. How in itself, I think it's a good way. It's a good store of value, and there's nothing wrong with it. But it's about if you have other opportunities that you forego and in order to make this property thing a reality, what would those other opportunities have brought you in?
it? Okay. Thank you so much, Erin, for this. Erin, what do you think are some common mistakes people make when it comes to buying a house? What are some common mistakes that you see that people make?
Of them we already have spoken about is underestimating the cost, in a sense that you are not taking into account the duties, the legal fees, maintenance, rates and taxes, and all of that, which sort of can set you up for surprise. That's one thing. The other thing is also to think a little bit about the area, and in fact, I think it's quite important actually where you buy and the future potential of that area. Because, I mean, property in one hears it, the estate agents, they will always tell you it's all about location. And I think it's quite true, especially in an urban environment where things can evolve over time, where all of a sudden your sweet little neighborhood could convert into some, you know, some neighborhood that's quite loud and maybe very different from where you bought 15 years ago or so. And so in some way, obviously the aim is to ensure that over time you maintain value.
Okay, thank you. So now, what are the common mistakes that you see people investing in houses in Africa, especially maybe when they've lived in Europe for a very long time or in America for a very long time? What are some of the common mistakes that you see them making when they're kind of like coming to invest in a house in Africa?
Different markets have their different different things, but I think if it's diaspora and they invest to rent out I think the African rental market has very different dynamics than the US or Europe. And one needs to bear that in mind. And I think that's very important. And especially like these type of things, I mean, I'm also now thinking about Abidjan rental market, where, for example, the deposit that you pay in terms of upfront. So what is it? It's almost 5 months or 5 periods rental payments that you need to pay upfront. It's two months deposit, 1 month for the agent, and what else comes on top? So you have to, yeah, and then I think especially with the 2 months or the basically the 2 installments of rental payment, that may not be common in Europe or the US. But again, in markets where you expect a lot of damage, maybe to your house, if tenants leave, yeah, I guess that may be a useful consideration.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for everything. It was really a nice discussion to have. Thank you so much for all the contributions. Thank you for guiding us with your view on whether we should actually rent or buy a house. Thank you for educating us. Thank you for educating us on this topic. It was really a beautiful session. And thanks for calling in all the time, ready with your wisdom to help us. We really appreciate.
Yeah, thank you, Shirley. It was nice being with you.
To everyone in Namibia that you will meet on your way. And until next week, yeah, thank you very much. Hello, fellow viewers. This is what we had for you today on Smart Money Talks. And it's always a pleasure being here. But please, you need to contribute, okay? Please share with someone who you never know, right? Such discussions are always very necessary. And you never know who this can actually benefit. So please, it's always important that you don't watch this alone. Please share it with others. Is that okay? Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much. And we do hope that as you move along, you're going to make better decisions, especially in regards to our decision for our topic for today, which is rent or buy a house. Thank you. Love you. Bye-bye.